Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legislative Commission on Metro Government. I'm calling the meeting to order, and the first thing on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Is there somebody that would like to make that motion?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you, Senator Dibble. Okay, all those in favor, the motion has been approved. All those in favor say aye. Approved,
Aye.
same sign. The minutes stand approved as written. The first thing on our agenda, and we have a really aggressive agenda today, so try to be very succinct in your comments, will be the review of the Metropolitan Council Unified Budget for 2021. And Judd, would you like to begin with that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Again, my name is Judd Shetman. I am the Government Affairs Director for the Metropolitan Council. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you this afternoon. I do know that there is a lot of ground to cover today. I will mention that at 2 o'clock, or a few minutes before 2 o'clock, a few of us from the Met Council side have to sign off because we begin a meeting of the Governor's Blue Ribbon Committee on Met Council issues as well. So I know Nick Thompson and I will both have to peel off a few minutes before 2 o'clock. But looking at the agenda, it looks like we're going to start with the review of the council's 2021 draft unified budget, capital and operating budget. And with us, I have Marie Henderson. Marie is our acting CFO, and she will walk through the presentation. It is fashioned similarly to previous years' budget presentations. And I also have a number of staff online who may be able to answer your questions. Just so folks know, I did send a copy of the public comment draft to the members back at the end of October, and then I sent another copy around for folks on last Friday as well. And so hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at that. But without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Marie, and we'll kick it off. So thanks everybody, and I look forward to this conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to make sure that everybody can see my screen and the PowerPoint presentation.
And for the record, would you identify yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thank you.
And please proceed.
Thank you. Just was checking to make sure you see that. So good afternoon, members of the committee. I am Marie Henderson. I'm the acting CFO of the Metropolitan Council. This presentation today is intended to be high-level overview, and we'll be happy to come back and discuss in more detail if you have further questions. This first slide begins with our statutory responsibilities for planning, operations, and grant making. The Council adopts policy plans for transportation, water resources, regional parks, and housing. We operate 9 wastewater treatment plants, collecting approximately 250 gallons of wastewater daily through our system that includes over 600 miles of inceptor pipe, 60 pump stations, and 200 metering facilities, and is nationally recognized as a successful and efficient operator. The regional transit system provides approximately 85 million rides in 2019 and will approximately provide 35 million rides in 2020, serving customers going to work, school, and entertainment, and we'll talk more about ridership in a future slide. The Metropolitan Housing and Redevelopment Authority provides housing for more than 6,500 families in the metro area and earns the highest ranking from the U.S. House and Urban Development for efficient and effective services. The Council provides grant funding for communities and the regional parks implementation agencies through our Livable Communities and Parks programs. Today, the budget we're going to discuss is what we call the public comment draft budget for 2021. On October 28th, the Council approved this draft for review and comment by the public. Please remember that our fiscal year is January 1st through December 31st. which is consistent with our partners in the city and county government. Consistently of how local and county governments adopt their budgets, we have been taking feedback on our proposed budget and levy amounts since October 28th. On December 9th, we are scheduled to present the final 2021 budget, taking into account the feedback we've received for the council's approval. The proposed budget we are discussing today will be updated prior to the final adoption with changes from our November MVES forecast, and we continue to learn more details about COVID-19 impacts to the council. Our unified budget includes levy amounts and the detailed operating budget for 2021, as well as our 6-year capital budget plan. I will begin with an overview looking at our operating budget. The 2021 proposed operating budget is $1.138 billion. This is a decrease of $16 million or 1.4% from 2020. This decrease is primarily driven by ridership and service level assumptions in our transit system. We have 3 operating divisions, each with distinctive services and dedicated funding sources. The largest is transportation, which includes our bus, rail, and metro mobility programs, and is 55% of our budget. Our environmental services division provides wastewater treatment program, which is 26% of our budget, and our community development division includes our livable communities, parks, and housing programs, and is 10% of our budget. Regional administration provides the common support services for our operating divisions, such as procurement, human resources, and payroll, and is mostly allocated to operations. Our OPEB, which is our other post-retirement benefits, reflects the fully funded status of our retiree healthcare liability, and the earnings on OPEB fund balance are used to pay the retiree medical premiums. Funds are invested with the Minnesota State Board of Investment for this purpose. The right side pie chart breaks down our budget uses by operations, pass-through, debt service, and OPEB. This distribution remains similar year over year for the council. 18% of our funds are used to pay debt service on bonds issued by the council to support our capital program. About 75% of our debt service pays for wastewater treatment infrastructure and supported by wastewater fees. Debt service for parks and transit are supported by the council's tax levy. Pass-through funding primarily reflects our housing, livable communities, and parks program. Nearly 60% of our operation budget pays for salary and benefits for council employees. Our 2021 budget includes a proposed full-time employees of 4,557. This is 29 more than the 2020 budget. Most of this increase is in environmental services and light rail for our Southwest Light Rail project. Of the 4,557 full-time employees, 2,106, or 46%, are bus operators and maintenance employees. This is down 40 from the 2020 budget. The Metro Transit Police has 178 FTEs. This pie chart shows the funding sources of our operating budget. An important note is that our sources of funding and our percentage look very similar from year to year. Charges for services, both wastewater and fares, represent about 1/3 of our funding. State revenues for MVEST and state appropriations are a little more than 1/3 of our funding. The federal government contributes $175 million to our operating budget. Out of that, $72 million is passed through for our housing authority. Transportation receives $29 million to support operations in preventative maintenance for our transit fleet. And $74 million is coming from the Federal CARES Act, including $1 million going to pass through to our suburban transit providers. Property taxes support about 8% of our operating budget, primarily funding our debt service and grant programs, and is only about 2% supporting operations. There's primarily investment income, which is about $16 million in our OPEB plan assets. We have planned use of reserves for our operations, which is primarily in transportation, and we'll talk more about that in a few slides. Next, we'll look at services, at charges for services in a little bit more detail. Wastewater charges include our municipal, industrial, and sewer availability charges. The proposed budget includes an increase in the municipal wastewater charges of 2%. Normal rate increases would have been closer to 3.5%, but we wanted to be sensitive to our customers' cities' fiscal challenges in this pandemic. This represents a $2.75 increase per residential connection, and an average Metro household will pay around $28 monthly for their sewer service. Of that amount, 55% to 65% goes to the council and the remaining to the local municipality. Our retail rates for sewer services to households in our region are about 40% lower than the national average of our peer agencies across the nation. Sewer access charges have not had a rate increase since 2014. Development is still robust in the residential market, which is driven mostly by new apartments. The environmental services continues near perfect compliance with both federal and state clean water standards and data requirements, with 6 plants receiving the National Association of Clean Water Agency Platinum Peak Performance Award, including 1 plant for more than 29 years. Fares for revenue and ridership are obviously interconnected. COVID-19 has had a striking impact on ridership and fare revenue. With the pandemic, there has been significant changes to commuting patterns of our customers. These changes are continuing to evolve with the evolution of this pandemic. Current ridership is down 65% on bus overall, but not equally across the system. We are seeing ridership down 70% on light rail and 95% on commuter rail and 50% on Metro Mobility. Buses down, like I said, 65%, but BRT and local bus ridership have been more and much more resilient during the COVID-19, while commuter express routes trend similar to the North Star commuter rail. These patterns do continue, and ridership recovery is long-term, which may become a new normal. For the 2021 proposed budget, we assumed an 80% service level. Since developing the preliminary budget, we continue to monitor ridership down to the route levels and anticipate we will likely lower that assumption recovery outcome prior to adopting the final 2021 budget. Operations in 2020 and into 2021 have included many significant operation changes. These changes are contained within the 2021 operating budget and include daily cleaning and disinfecting of buses and rail cars and facilities, limiting rider capacity on bus, moving larger buses to our busiest routes, and adding unscheduled trips to keep capacity down, requiring face coverings for riders, installing barriers to separate riders and operators as we returned to front door boarding, temperature screenings for employees, and providing preventive equipment to our operators and handing out masks to our riders. For Metro Mobility customers, we also added service options to limit exposure to others, including delivery food to the customer rather than having them travel to the grocery store, banks, or restaurants. We have implemented curbside service where the customer is driven to the destination and the driver waits for up to 20 minutes for the customer to conduct business and return them home. The Federal CARES Act was signed into law on March 27th of 2020. $25 billion was allocated to the transit infrastructure grants. $308 million was allocated to Minnesota, of which $226 million was allocated to the council. $214 remain with the council and $12 million to the suburban transit providers. The FTA allocated funds nationally to designated recipients based upon the federal formula that used inputs from the National Transit Database, reporting to distribute the federally formula 5307 funds. Regionally, we mirrored the federal approach and allocation funds to regional providers based upon that federal formula. The council submitted the grant application on April 30th. The FTA grant was approved by May 29th. These funds are 100% federal, no federal match required, and the funds are available until expended. We feel that our strategy is consistent with the CARES Act goals and is clear and is easy to understand. I want to switch gears a moment and step back to our state fiscal year picture based on the Council's 2020 adopted budget. Just a reminder, this scenario reflected current law appropriations. The Council received a non-base appropriation for Metro Mobility to fill our funding gap for the state fiscal year 2020 and 2021. Metro Mobility was also separated as a program. State appropriation are used for Metro Mobility, light rail at 50%, and state share of commuter rail. This forecast had us spending down our reserves above target, mostly in the current biennium. CARES Act funding has allowed us to push that out. Our biennium forecast has improved as a result of the $214 million federal CARES Act funding that will allow us to push our fiscal funding cliff further into the next biennium. But again, we are working with one-time funding sources to get us there. This slide shows our structural deficit, $72 million in current biennium and $124 million in the state fiscal year 2023 through 2024. The legislature solved the $36.2 million in state fiscal year 2021 with the one-time appropriation, and the council has available resources above target that will be depleted next biennium. We have been planning and saving to be part of the solution, if only short term. This does not hit the programs within transportation equally. Metro Mobility, $49 million, light rail, $6 million, bus, $24 million, with most of the reserves used in bus as we spend the CARES Act funds earlier. The federal CARES Act funding are forecasted to be fully expended by December of 2022. We anticipate being down to our minimum reserves in Metro Mobility and rail in 2022 and bus in early 2023. Our calendar year 20 and 21 budgets are balanced while remaining our target reserve balances. We can only do this through cost containment, service reductions, and very high use of one-time funds. This includes the federal CARES Act and reserves. We have anticipated this fiscal cliff for several years as we have dealt with one-time funding and intentionally built reserves to help address the situation. These one-time funds disappear in the next biennium and ongoing fiscal cliff remains. I want to move on to other areas of our budget. This chart breaks out our proposed 2021 property tax levy. The total property tax levy is at 0% increase from 2020 at $88.7 million. This year, given the pandemic and the financial challenges facing our communities and citizens, we have a 0% increase. A few things to note about this slide. First, unlike other municipal entities, the council's general purpose levy funds less than 2% of our operations. Debt service for transit, and we have debt service for transit and for parks. By maximizing our non-debt service, this will apply pressure to the levies in future year payments. As we will have the funding for future years, this is not a sustainable approach to this levy. The metropolitan area taxes are split among several governmental entities. In this graphic, it shows that counties, cities, and school districts account for the largest portion of the metro tax dollar. The council typically receives about 1.4% of the revenue from property taxes paid by the metro area residents. The proposed 0% levy increase on a homeowner with property value of around $250 have the following impact. The homeowner residing within the transit tax communities on average will pay around $49.42. And outside the transit taxing community will pay around $16.63. And as we know, not all things are equal year over year, and individual taxpayers will have different experiences depending upon factors like increasing home value. This slide explains the transit tax community and those outside. The blue area is the transit taxing district established by Minnesota Statute 473-466. It includes the 7-county metro area minus, and going counterclockwise, Hanover, Rockford, New Prague, and Northfield. The blue and the red area is the transit capacity levy communities. These were expanded in from Lakeville, Forest Lake in Columbus, and Maple Plain. The council bonds have the highest rating possible from Moody's and Standard & Poor's, allowing us to borrow at the lowest market interest rates. The AAA rating was maintained in our 2020 issuance in May for our GO bonds for parks and environmental services. And again, just in November for our GANs and refinancing of the council's Build America bonds, achieving very low interest rates. The council, so changing now to the 2021 capital program. The council has an $8.5 billion capital program over the next 6 years. Our capital program contains projects or phases of projects for which the council has secured funding and authorized spending in projects that are planned but have not yet secured funding, and no spending has been authorized. The projects remain in the capital program until complete, and as shown, $2.6 billion or 31% of the funding for authorized program has been spent in previous years for projects that have not yet been completed. Of our authorized and unspent, $575 million is currently anticipated to be spent in our calendar year 2021. This pie chart shows anticipated funding for the capital program. Of course, not all funding has been secured. The federal dollars make up the largest share of the funding source at 40%, followed by local sources at 28%, which reflects our light rail project. Regional reflects council bonding authority, and state is primarily for parks. This slide reflects the plan spending beyond this fiscal year. Of those projects that are authorized, 57% are for wastewater projects. For those projects in CIP, 63% are in transitway projects, including light rail and BRT projects. This concludes our presentation and open for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Madam Chair, I raised my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that Representative Hertaus?
Thank you. Just a question on the first pie chart with regard to the operating budget. Can you help me reconcile the 1.13 billion? I added up the amounts that numbers are there. It appears, I guess my question would be, is OPEB and regular administration $100 million?
Is that Ms. Henderson? Do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you. I'm just pulling up that slide.
I guess 9% of 1.138 billion probably would be that number. All the other pieces of the pie have a dollar amount affixed to them, but I
Yes,
noticed that.
and
one
that is
there.
and that is the correct amount. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, let's see. Representative Yumakim?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had maybe Ms. Henderson can go over a little bit more the effect of COVID on the transit budget and the use of the CARES money. I'm interested to hear a little bit more about how that was spent.
Ms. Henderson?
Thank you. I also have on the line with me today is Ed Petrie of Metro Transit and Wes Koistra. They want to talk a little bit about the COVID impact.
Okay, if they would identify themselves and proceed.
Record, my name is Wes Koistra, Metro Transit, and I'll say on a general sense that
It might be helpful if you can talk a little louder.
I'll bring my microphone down. I
There you
apologize.
go.
For the record, I'll mention that we're currently drawing down COVID funds based upon lost revenues. So that's how it's being spent. But there's a number of categories that we could draw COVID funds under, and so that's not the only way to do it. And we're talking about currently talking about ways that we can draw those funds down quicker and by adding more categories of eligibility to that. So that's a general answer to that. In terms of specifics, I would have to rely on Ed, but I think that's fairly accurate in how we're approaching it right now. I think we're starting to see the need of drawing it down quicker as they consider another bill, and I just think it's good to get the federal money in hand as quickly as possible.
And good afternoon, Chair, committee members. My name is Ed Petrie. I'm Director of Finance with Metro Transit. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you. As Mr. Koistra mentioned, we have pulled, the Council's transportation divisions have pulled the CARES Act money down based upon lost revenues that we have been incurring, and also based on some of our COVID cleaning costs. That's how we have pulled the funds down. Our current projection is, as of the end of December of 2020, out of the $226 million, we will have pulled down about $120 million of those funds. With the balance of those funds then planned to be pulled in 2020 and early 2022. But as Mr. Koistra has mentioned also, we're also looking at other eligible expenses and maybe pulling down those funds earlier. But our current forecast right now is about $120 million as of the end of 2020.
Madam Chair, a follow-up?
Follow, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. what are some of the categories? You mentioned some of them. Is it just on transit, or are you spending on with cleaning supplies and stuff and wastewater treatment and other areas? And then how has COVID affected Metro Mobility? And I'd kind of like to hear about some of the programs. I hadn't realized you were doing a food delivery. That's pretty cool.
And who is going to take that question?
Hey, Madam Chair, this is Marie Henderson. For wastewater, the Federal CARES Act only covered for transportation. Wastewater is containing their budget with all the extra cleaning for COVID underneath their own operating. For Metro Mobility, I know Nick Thompson is also on the line to explain the programs that we've expanded in that area.
Madam Chair, this is Nick Thompson. Can you hear me?
We can. Proceed. Thank you.
Nick Thompson, Director of Metropolitan Transportation Services at the Council, which includes the Metro Mobility Program. We've made substantial changes to the Metro Mobility Program since COVID restrictions began in March. First and foremost was to protect the customer base who, as you fully know, is highly vulnerable to the COVID and impacts of COVID. So we changed our service model to be direct ride, where we do not do shared ride with Metro Mobility anymore. This allows us to transport the person directly from their origin to their destination without interfacing with another passenger. And then in between each ride, we do cleaning of the vehicles. We also have, of course, implemented a mask policy for drivers and for customers. As you know, mobility customers are escorted by the drivers, and there is close contact. So we're very careful about making sure that there's protected both the customer and the driver. We, in order to also protect the customers, many of which did not want to travel due to the restrictions, but still needed food delivery and other essential services, we allowed them to schedule rides or service delivery of essential services. And we had never done that before, so they can order food from a local grocery or food pantry, and we will deliver that, book that ride and deliver that directly to them. That way they're not exposed to others in the community. We also are using Metro Mobility to provide essential rides to healthcare workers. As we scaled back some of our transit service, we saw that there was a key need for healthcare workers to get to hospitals and other clinics that were treating COVID. So we're using a little bit of the capacity of Metro Mobility to provide rides for healthcare workers that have been deemed essential. And lastly, we are doing general food delivery from food banks or food shelves to meet the needs of customers who cannot travel throughout the region, and that we can schedule almost routine scheduled trips of delivery of boxes of food on a daily or weekly basis to customers in all 7 counties of the region. So all of those things combined have been major changes to Metro Mobility. And as Marie mentioned, we are using some of the CARES funds for a portion of this services and the changes.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up?
Just one more real quick. Have you had a
Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have you had a lot of folks utilizing that for the essential workers? And does that include folks that work at the hospital that clean the rooms and serve the food as well?
Yes, Madam Chair and member, yes, we are having actually a continually growing demand in that service, almost up to 1,000 trips per week. And it is for anybody with a badge that identifies them as working at a healthcare facility. So it's not just a nurse or doctor, anybody who works at one of those facilities.
And does that also include, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, does that also include long-term care facilities?
Madam Chair, member, yes.
Mr. Thompson, okay. Representative, any more?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Koznick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is about the level of debt service at 18%. If I could just get some comments on, I presume they're going to say it's an adequate level, but what looking forward, is that a level that they are comfortable with? Is that something, is there a plan to reduce that and free up other revenues for service rather than just debt service? If I could get some comments on that, I'd appreciate it.
Who would like to answer that one?
Yes, Madam Chair. A debt service,
Henderson.
we're very comfortable with that level. Because we have maintained our AAA rating through this COVID, both in May and for our GANS issuance, and it was unprecedented. We received a 0.3% on that GANS offering. Every time we go out for bonding, we have our bond counsel look at all of our debt, and if there is a way to refinance or relook at what we currently have to bring down that debt, we have, and that's why we were able to do some refinancing of the Build America bonds at this issuance, and we look forward to doing more of that in 2021 as interest rates are going and holding a little bit lower.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up?
No, Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Runbeck. Representative Runbeck. Okay, I think, I'm not sure she's here, so why don't we go with Representative Elkins, and then I'll double back for Representative Runbeck.
So this year I'm saying, so there's no general levy increase, no increase in SAC charges, a very small increase in wastewater charges. I also noticed that there's been no SAC increase since 2014. I'm wondering if there is an implicit underlying policy on the council's part to gradually shift even capital expenses away from the SAC charge and towards wastewater charges, or am I reading too much into it?
Who would like to take that?
Yes, Madam Chair and Council Member, our SAC charges have remained. We have minimum reserves that we have looked at, and they're always being maintained. And because the residential, in particular apartments, are covering for these expenses for the reserves, there is no need to increase that rate at this time.
So it's a question basically, reserves are adequate, so there's no need to raise them.
That's correct.
Okay.
And
then one thing that I've been noticing, in fact, I had drafted a bill related to this, but under the Livable Communities program, especially the tax-based revitalization account, which is used to fund brownfield cleanup around the region. That account, the levy limit has been frozen at $5 million since 1995. And I know there's been a big increase in demand for grants under that program. And while it's kind of too late to do anything for this year, I do intend to introduce that bill in January that would raise the levy limits, especially on the TBRA account, but also looking at possibly increases on the local housing incentive account and some of the other livable communities accounts as well. And just kind of a heads up, I would like to circle back with Met Council staff and have some discussion about what would be an appropriate level of funding these programs based on the volume of grant applications that cities are tendering right now.
Ms. Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Judd, would you like to weigh in on this comment, question?
Sure, and thank you, Representative Elkins. I will make sure that we circle back with you. I know that we had a few conversations about this over the course of the summer and leading up to a couple of the special sessions, but I'll reach out to our folks and get something set up with you probably for the week after Thanksgiving.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great.
Next is Representative Runbeck, still online. Representative Runbeck? Okay. Next, we'll go to, I think it's Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple of simple questions. One is, I was a little bit distracted when slide number 4, the two different pie charts were being presented. And I think just from reading them, I can distinguish between the two pie charts. But Ms. Henderson, can you just explain that chart again, the difference? The one on the left is pretty self-explanatory. What is the one on the right?
Ms. Henderson?
I think it's.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee member. This should be one more
I just
button.
lost it. I had it up on my screen.
You should be able to see it now. So the pie chart is by division and
Right.
then by function. So we have pass-through grant and our debt service, and 69% of that through our operations is our operating budget.
So it's basically measuring the same pile of money, but in different ways.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And then my second question, Representative Joachim was asking Mr. Thompson about the Metmo rides for healthcare workers and whether or not they're being well used or not. My question is there more capacity to provide? Is it being fully utilized, or is there more capacity for healthcare workers to request rides? I have a particular interest in this. My sister is a nurse and sometimes has transportation challenges and really does need to stay safe from COVID. She actually is positive now in quarantine, doing well. But yeah, is there more capacity, or is it fully subscribed at this point?
Madam Chair, Senator, this is again Nick Thompson. We do have, I would say we do have some capacity. We're prioritizing our capacity for, of course, Metro Mobility customers first, healthcare workers second. And what we do believe that we have the capability to have multiple healthcare workers travel on the bus safely. So sometimes we can add capacity by allowing a second or third healthcare worker, as long as they are socially distanced on the bus and wearing masks. So at this time, we are not overprescribed. And if it is go through the Metro Mobility website and you call your provider, there's a phone number where you can book that service. And so I would encourage that. And I anticipate that we won't be over capacity for the remainder of the calendar year. It really depends on how fast the Metro Mobility ridership comes back. But in light of where we're at right now with the high levels of COVID, our Metro Mobility ridership, but we're not anticipating to grow anytime real soon, as they've really heeded the call to stay at home where they can and only use Metro Mobility for essential trips. So I do believe we have capacity at this time.
Any follow-up?
No, thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Next, I have Representative Hertaus. Or was that from before? Representative Hertaus? Okay, I think I'll move on to Representative Hornstein and we can go back if that's
Thank you,
necessary.
Madam Chair. And I don't know if this would be for Ms. Henderson or Mr. Thompson, but it was mentioned in the overview that among the transit modes that were at least doing better than others, all of course had decreases. You had pointed out that bus rapid transit was doing better. And I have a couple questions related to that. One would be, are you referring to the arterial bus rapid transit in that? And that would be number one. And then number two, do you have any survey data or anecdotal data that would indicate the reason why that particular mode is doing better than the others?
Ms. Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm going to call on Ed Petrie to talk about how it's not evenly distributed for the decrease of ridership.
Mr. Petrie?
Madam Chair, this is Wes Coister. Maybe I can help a little bit with that. Let me give it a shot
Thank you.
while Mr. Petrie's trying to get on. I think the arterial bus rapid transit, we mentioned the differences, and I'll mention again in another presentation I'll be doing later, the differences of performance across different types of bus service. And ABRT has performed about the best. And I think I think it has performed the best, and it's probably in the neighborhood. I don't have the numbers in front of me of between 45 and 50% ridership loss, where we have the average ridership loss across the system of 65%. I will suggest a couple of possible reasons for that. And I don't know, I don't have a survey that will necessarily confirm that, but something to consider would be, first of all, it is all-day service that is provided in short intervals, and it's fast and frequent, and all the attributes of arterial bus rapid transit, which I'm referring to here, really play into why it sustains ridership during this time. And the other attribute of that is that these services tend to go through areas where there is greater reliance on transit for fundamental mobility needs, ways to get to jobs, personal needs that are essential needs that have to be met. And I think the very location and the nature of the service really lend to the fact that it's performing better than most of our other services.
And
Any follow-up?
Madam Chair, this is Ed Petrie, Metro Transit. I could also fill in some additional data.
Okay, proceed, please.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Ed Petrie, once again, Metro Transit. As Mr. Coister had mentioned, we have done a deeper dive on our ridership, looking at our ridership patterns across the Metro Transit system. And like we had said, our overall ridership on our bus system is down about 64 to 65%. But one of the things that we've discovered then is our core local service, which is our pretty well local service, is down about 58%. Suburban local is down about 71. Our express service, which whether it's bus or commuter rail, are generally down about 93 to 95%. We're seeing on the BRT side, as Mr. Coister had mentioned, right now our BRT service is down about 29 to 30%. So it is performing much better than the rest of our service. Then our next good area then is the core local service.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yeah, Madam Chair, just quick, related then. Do you have data, or again, either through survey or anecdotal, what percentage of the ridership through the pandemic have been what we would consider frontline workers, healthcare workers, grocery store workers, others that are what we would consider essential or frontline employees? What percentage of the ridership would consist of those types of workers?
Madam Chair,
Who's taking that? Proceed.
We don't have survey information or data that would tell us that. We of course aren't checking with riders and testing if their ride is essential or not. There's not a mechanism for doing that, but we haven't, to my knowledge, we haven't done any surveys to talk about the purpose of the ride. Our message all along has been that transit is for essential rides only. So if there's compliance, all the rides are for essential. I'm not saying there's full compliance by any means to that request, but I apologize. I don't have any source that would give you the number of the essential rides, but that's the emphasis that we're placing on the use of it for essential rides only.
Thank you.
Representative Hornstein, any follow-up then?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think Representative Koznick is up again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Hornstein, I appreciate your questions there. And that was kind of what I was going to ask, how that budget is reflective of the evolution and changes in current transit and what we foresee will be probably some long-term changes in transit use. But Mr. Petrie, some of the percentages and such that you shared with us, sounds like you have it pretty handy. And I'm wondering if you could, if you have a report or something like that you could forward to the committee rather than, but just so we would have it available.
Chair, committee members, yeah, absolutely. We do have information. Yeah, Thank you very much. We are actually working with our strategic initiatives department, actually doing a lot of analysis on our ridership, and we have some trendings and some charts, et cetera, that we can forward.
That would be appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, Representative Joachim.
While we're on this topic, quick question. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. So I know some of our public school kids, especially around Minneapolis, utilize the public transit to get to school, and with distance learning, how much has that affected your budget?
Who is taking that?
Ed, do you have any data on the
Ms. Henderson?
school children?
Chair committee members, not off the top of my, not right available with me today, but I can find that information out.
Thank you, Mr. Petrie.
Thank you.
Follow up?
Thank you.
No, thank you. I was just curious because I wasn't sure how much of those purchase tickets were part of your budget to begin with. Just wondering.
Okay.
Yes, I can pull that data together.
Mr. Petrie. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question really kind of expands a little bit on Representative Joachim's first question about COVID-19 and transportation. I guess I'm curious, we've heard the data that ridership is down substantially in all areas of public transit, and particularly with buses, 65%. My question to the council would be, have you been maintaining the same level of service irregardless of the number of people who are riding, or have you made adaptations in your schedule and reduced the number of routes for the frequency of buses if ridership isn't there? I noticed that transportation accounts for 55% of your budget, and that's $600 million. You've got 158 million spent just on Metro Transit busing, 214 million total CARES Act funding on transportation, which is a third of your total operating costs in terms of having that monies available, yet ridership is down. And I do realize that the fare box does not represent the 623 million, but there must, I'm hoping to hear you say that you've made adjustments and not just running these buses perpetually with nobody on them.
Madam Chair, this is Wes Koister again.
Proceed, thank you.
That's a really good question, and I will say that our bus service is designed to about 80% of service levels. And you might ask, well, if we're down 65%, why are we running 80% of service levels? It's because to provide bus service and rail service to the extent required to accommodate social distancing, we have limited the capacity on our buses to about 25% of normal capacity. So it takes more buses to provide the same service and under that limited capacity to accommodate social distancing. We're even going as far as doing analytics that tell us when buses are overloaded and when we need to add trips to that particular routes in order to accommodate the social distancing. Right now we are down about 130 operators from normal, 130 or 140 operators from normal complements. I will also mention that we have to maintain some hiring because of the impact of COVID on our workforce. Today, it was reported to me that the number of operators that are out either because of positive cases or due to being quarantined or other reasons of sickness are about 140 of those riders as well. So we're down today over 200 operators from our normal pre-COVID complement of operators. About half of those are not employed anymore. In addition, we've reduced the commuter rail service from 72 trips a week to 20 trips a week, and we've made reductions in staffing at commuter rail to correspond and align with those reductions as well. So I think in summary, we've made reductions to services. There's certain challenges of COVID that means that those reductions in service and cost do not align perfectly with the reductions in ridership. And of course, then there's always as we look forward, there's always the question about when do we hit the post-pandemic period? And I think, you know, we are trying to consider that as we budget forward, when the pandemic may be over and when ridership will go back to normal and rules will go back to normal. And that's all, you know, we're doing our best to anticipate that with the discussions of the vaccines, but of course, no one really knows how this is going to play out in 2021. That's one of the issues in our budget.
Well, thank you.
Representative Hertas.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that explanation. It makes sense with regard to the social distancing you want to maintain on the bus, but you've now piqued a follow-up question for me. So hypothetically, if the bus had every seat filled, which we know it seldomly does, but if it were filled completely, what is that capacity on a bus, a typical bus? You know, what is the limit? And then based on social distancing, what kind of spacing or what is the capacity based on social distancing? Is it 25% of capacity or 10%? I'm just curious.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Wes Koistra again. The capacity on a 40-foot bus is 40 passengers typically on our 40-foot buses, and our current capacity for social distancing that we've done by measuring off and adhering to health department guidelines is 10. For a 60-foot bus, the capacity is 60 passengers, and we have again created a new capacity limit of 15. That's about a quarter of what the typical capacity is, and that's not to say that in every given moment there's less than 10 or less than 15. We can't manage that perfectly, but that's our goal, and that's what we ask riders to adhere to, that they see a bus with more than that they not get on. I'll also mention that we're really careful about how we might enforce that, because we're not looking for conflicts between operators and riders, and so we're really relying on the goodwill of the public to help us with that, and relying on our operations to make sure there's enough trips out there to accommodate that as well.
One more follow-up.
Okay. Representative Hertas.
Thank you. So ironically, would you say then that COVID-19 and the spatial requirements to maintain distancing kind of matches the capacity of the maintaining a full bus route service that we've been doing?
Madam Chair, the capacity that we're doing right now, we're at right now, is about service capacity for bus is about 80% of normal capacity. We do have a larger extra board, which is a reference to operators that we have available to each garage to have ad hoc assignments, and we have that large extra board both to accommodate additional operators who may be out ill due to COVID reasons, you know, extraordinary numbers. So we have a larger extra board than normal, or to add those trips I mentioned if we're finding at a particular time in our information systems that we're having capacity issues on our buses. We add trips on an ad hoc basis. So we have a larger extra board than we would normally have at 80%, and so it's 80% plus that sort of extra factor to accommodate some of the unique circumstances that we're operating under.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Hello, you done? Okay. What I'd like to do now is move on to item 4, the administrative citations and follow up to the meeting earlier this year. Mr. Shetnan, would you like to take the lead on that?
There we go. Madam Chair, I believe I was able to get this pulled up for the committee members. What I'm going to do is turn this over to a familiar voice, and Mr. Koistra is actually going to give this update.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Koistra.
Madam Chair, again, for the record, my name is Wes Koistra. I serve as the General Manager of Metro Transit, and we appreciate the opportunity today to discuss safety and security on our transit system, as well as provide a quick overview of the administrative citations proposal. Next slide, please. I believe it's the chart on ridership. We've been talking about this quite a bit. So to provide context, I wanted to begin this discussion with an overview of the impact of the pandemic on our ridership. The chart shows a drastic drop in ridership that occurred in late March, once it was understood that the pandemic was spreading in Minnesota and across our region. Prior to the onset of the pandemic, we had been actually experiencing some growth in ridership in January and February over our 2019 numbers. But as mentioned earlier by Maria Henderson, and we've talked about in the context of other questions, total ridership across all modes, bus, train, and commuter rail is down about 65%, and ridership losses vary significantly by service. Local bus is down closer to 50 to 55%, while LRT is down between 70 and 75%, and commuter express bus and commuter rail are down 95%. You might notice two anomalies on this ridership chart, one showing no LRT ridership for a few days in April and another showing no system-wide ridership for a few days beginning in late May. The first suspension of LRT service occurred for track maintenance, and this is an example of Metro Transit trying to take advantage of this low ridership period to address some of the capital maintenance needs that might disrupt services. The second system-wide service suspension occurred during the civil unrest that followed the horrific murder of George Floyd. Certainly, teleworking and remote learning at high schools, colleges, and universities play a significant role in our overall reduction in ridership. But as we mentioned earlier, we are actively messaging to our riders to use transit for essential trips only. This is not a message that we'd like to deliver. It's not a message we want to deliver. We want to encourage people to use transit, but our overarching operating principle has been to strictly follow the governor's emergency orders and the Minnesota Community Health and CDC guidance as it relates to the operations of our services. This is a difficult message, as I said, but it's our responsibility as an entity that provides public services in a shared space. We are focusing on making our transit system as safe as possible for our operators and our riders who require public transit to meet their essential mobility needs. Marie briefly mentioned these, but I think they're worth mentioning again. Besides messaging that transit is for essential services only, we also have reduced the capacity of our 40 and 60-foot buses to 25% of pre-COVID capacity to accommodate social distancing as discussed. We've added trips to our busiest routes to ensure that necessary services are available under the reduced capacity limits. We clean and disinfect our rolling stock on buses and train cars daily. For a while, we have asked riders to board at the back of the bus to prevent unnecessary contact with operators. And then after manufacturing and installing 600 barriers to separate the operators from the riders, we return to front door boarding. Metro Transit strictly follows health department protocols when a positive case is reported, including contact tracing and mandatory quarantines. We have communicated that that masks are required for both our employees and our riders. And we are now in the first couple of weeks of doubling down on the importance of that mask requirement with new messaging and with increased monitoring by Metro Transit Police Department that includes increased education and handing out masks first, and if necessary, asking riders to leave our buses and trains if they refuse to comply with the mask requirement. This is for the sake of public health, and it's for the sake of the safety of our riders and our operators. While we are doing what we can to protect our riders and operators, I want to call out to the committee that most Metro Transit employees are essential on-site workers that include operators, mechanics, maintenance workers, street supervisors, police, and more, many of whom are in contact with the public every day, and it's their commitment to their work and the mission of transit that provides the mobility services required by people who truly need transit for their essential jobs and personal needs. With specific respect to crime In crime trends, it's really impossible to call out any trends in the context of how differently transit operates today and in the context of the significant reductions of ridership during the pandemic period. Of course, we are seeing decreased reports and incidents of criminal and other problematic behavior. Texts for safety are down significantly. Calls for service are down. Part-run crimes are down. Operator assaults are down. But this is not to suggest that this is a trend in any way when our ridership is also down 65%. And when services have also been somewhat reduced, as we have discussed. Next slide, please. In terms of what we've been doing to enhance security, we know that safety is one of the top 2 priorities of our riders. The other priority is reliability. This was true prior to the pandemic, and it continues to be true based on recent surveys. Perhaps it's even more so today, given the pandemic, and the importance of safety and security is articulated by all riders of all service types, from riders of core local bus routes to LRT riders to commuter express riders. All emphasize the importance of a welcoming, safe ride. In 2019, we dedicated one-time resources to increase our police presence. We did the same in calendar year 2020, and we also added cleaning and facilities maintenance staff to improve the conditions of our services. In 2020, we began installing real-time cameras to our light rail vehicles. Today, more than 65% of this work has been completed, and we expect all rail cars to have the real-time cameras installed by January. Metro Transit Police are now staffing the Real-Time Information Center with 1 full-time officer and 1 civilian officer. I also understand that currently we have assigned someone who's been assigned to light duty to also assist with the monitoring of the Real-Time Information Center and the monitoring of those cameras. The technology is being used to assist officer patrols by alerting officers to potential issues on board our rail cars, locating discarded weapons, and bringing offenders into custody. In addition, all full-time officers have been trained and are now wearing body-worn cameras. Both real-time cameras and body-worn camera video can also be instrumental in providing evidence once a suspect has been apprehended. Finally, the Metropolitan Council is conducting a review of the Metro Transit Police Department's policies, practices, and relationships. And this review is beginning with an extensive community engagement process led by the Citizens League to better understand perspectives on safety and enforcement on our transit system. Next slide, please.
Can you take a question?
Sure, absolutely.
It's Representative Kosnick, was your question regarding the past conversation?
It's on the safety, but I can wait until his formal comments are done to ask my question.
Okay, proceed, please.
Okay, Madam Chair, I'll begin. I want to talk a little bit about the administrative citations proposal. We really do believe that increasing an official presence on the transit system and establishing a more welcoming and regulated environment will remain key to improved safety and an improved rider experience. In 2019, Governor Walz proposed language that would allow the council to develop an administrative citations program for fare evasion. The governor also included administrative citations and corresponding funding in his 2020 supplemental budget. The current law makes fare evasion a misdemeanor that can only be charged by a sworn officer. The misdemeanor holds a current fine and court costs of approximately $180. As a misdemeanor, fare evasion citations must be administered by the courts, and our experience has been that these citations are rarely prosecuted by local governments. We believe that administrative citations will be an important element of our overall efforts to improve fare enforcement. And this becomes even more important with the build out of light rail and bus rapid transit lines that rely on off-board payment. Today, off-board payments occur for more than 1/3 of our rides, and this will grow when the operations of Green Line Extension, D-Line, Arterial Bus Rapid Transit, B-Line, Arterial Bus Rapid Transit, and future transit ways begin. But funding administrative citations will also bring a much greater official presence on our system, and that will improve safety. It will not only increase fare checks and deter fare evasion, more eyes and ears will be on our transit system to deter crime and other problematic behaviors. And it will also allow us to better focus police time on responses and the prevention of serious crimes. Administrative citations is also simply a fairer response to fare evasion. As a misdemeanor enforcement, as a misdemeanor that is enforced, that is the enforcement of fare evasion, as it results in a $180 cost in a criminal record.
Shane.
This is for not paying a $2.50 fare. This means incredibly harsh. This seems incredibly harsh, and think about this in comparison to a parking ticket, which is another form of penalty for failing to pay a transportation-related public service. We believe this harsh penalty for a relatively small offense significantly contributes to the resistance by the criminal justice system to prosecute fare evasion. But I want to say this is not trying to suggest that paying fares is unimportant. Fares represent nearly 1/4 of our revenue. In 2019, nearly $100 million. So we rely on fare payments, but we believe a fair and more robust system of fare enforcement, one that is more consistently and visibly applied, will result in notable improvements in fare compliance. Similar changes have been made in several transit agencies across the nation. So we are hopeful that the 2021 legislature will pass the administrative citations bill. And with that, Madam Chair, I'm available for questions or comments.
Representative Kosnick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kustra. We worked on the security issue and the administrative citation, so I look forward to working with the House majority and our Senate partners to continue to work in that effort. And so I appreciate your comments on that and putting this on the agenda, Madam Chair. There was recently a lot of news and discussion about the Minneapolis Police Department and them trying to get their security and public safety issues under control. They were talking about hiring out Metro Transit Police. Is Metro Transit even in a position to have their officers hired out? And can you comment on that? Because I certainly would want Metro Transit to have their own security issues under control before they're hired out. I get it, some of the areas overlap jurisdictionally a little bit, but just want to have your comments on that. Thank you.
Mr. Koistra.
Madam Chair and Representative Kosnick, we are prioritizing our Metro Transit Police Department officers to our transit system and to the needs of our riders and our operators and the protection of our property. And we have told the Minneapolis Police Department that will always be our priority. We are not in the position to transfer officers temporarily under the jurisdiction of the Minneapolis Police Department. But as you referenced, we do share geography, of course, because our transit system goes through 90 cities, including Minneapolis. And so there is always a structure for coordination and working together in that kind of environment. So our intent is to do what we can to assist the Minneapolis Police Department under the structures we currently have for collaboration and cooperation. That will not include assigning police officers to the Minneapolis Police Department, but I don't want to dismiss the importance of working together with not just the Minneapolis Police Department, but the St. Paul Police Department and the suburban police departments as we do our job. Those departments have to work in coordination with each other. We don't have these firm boundaries that we don't step beyond the tracks of the light rail or the bus stop. And the community safety is important, significantly important to transit safety. What's what's happening in the communities, because we travel throughout all those communities, is what happens on our buses and our light rail cars. So we have a significant interest in the safety of a community, whether that be Minneapolis, St. Paul, or suburban communities, and we're going to continue to work with them cooperatively and try to address together how best to achieve safety community-wide.
Is there a follow-up, Representative Koznick? Okay, Representative Hornstein, and then we'll go on to the next agenda.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And question for Mr. Koistra. You had mentioned a process with the Citizens League to evaluate the operations of the Metro Transit Police. Could you talk a little bit more about that process? What is involved with that? What questions are being asked? And to follow up, last section, Representative Koznick had wanted to ask a question about a report on a particular matter, and I will also ask to see if you will be reporting publicly about your process with the Citizens League. But really, what is the scope of that inquiry, and who is being involved? Who is at the table on that?
Madam Chair, this is my turn to pass this one to someone else. I believe Mary Bogie is with us, and she has a lot more detail about the council's review of the police department than I do. So I will answer it if she's not available, but Mary may have the best information for Representative Hornstein.
Okay. Mary, are you here?
Hello, Madam Chair, I am here. Can you hear me?
Okay. And if you would just introduce yourself and proceed, please.
Thank you. My name is Mary Bogie, and I'm the Acting Regional Administrator for the Met Council. So we are engaged with the Citizens League to help us with an engagement of our customers and stakeholders. In particularly, we want to engage with them about safety and enforcement on our transit system. And so safety might mean a different thing to different riders or different customers or different stakeholders in our system. And so the Citizens League is engaging with businesses, with our ridership, with our transit operators, a number of different stakeholders and customers to help us learn more about how people feel about those specific topics. So that's kind of our phase one is engage. And this is a long engagement. They're going to be engaging with those stakeholders and customers over November, December into January. And then the output of that will be a report about what that looks like. In the meantime, as well, they're looking at our police policies and procedures as a way to ask those questions about how do you feel about safety and enforcement within the construct of our police policies and procedures and how they're being implemented out there on the system. So that will lead us to a report at the end of this that we then we'll take a look at and say, where do we go from here? Is this where we want to be? Did we get answers that make us feel good about where we are, or do we have some work to do in our police review? And so that would be a phase two, is where do we take the information from the engagement that we got? Where do we take that to move the council forward? Chief Frizella is already working on kind of that 21st century policing, and he's been moving us in that direction for a while. Are we on the right path is kind of what we're looking for out of this engagement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a very quick follow-up, because I know you want to move on. But very quick, thank you, Ms. Bogie. So with this particular report, will this be presented formally at a Met Council meeting or a committee of the Met Council? The public will be able to take a look at this report, testify, weigh in, et cetera.
Ms. Bogie.
Madam Chair. Yes, absolutely. We're looking to come back to the council with this report and probably add some steps along the way. So I don't plan on waiting until we get to the end of this process. If we find something through engagement that says, hey, we should take a look at changing something a little bit differently, we'll be marching along those steps in tune with the chief's 21st century policing. And so we'll be making frequent trips, at least every month or so, to the council to have a discussion about where we're at. And absolutely at the end, we will be presenting the results of that engagement process.
And thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Bogie, the final report, what's the date then on that, or an interim report that would be published? What would the date be on that? And then I'm done, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. You respond, please. Ms. Bogie.
I think April is the timing of the final being ready to go.
We will look forward to hearing
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have two representatives from the Minnesota Valley Transit Authority. Mr. Winder, if you would introduce yourself, and also Mr. Hoopaw, and proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Clint Hoopaw, MBTA Chair and Apple Valley City Council member. I'm going to kick us off, and then I will turn it over to Mr. Winder for a little more detail. Let me just set the stage a little bit for why we're here, and then also let you know that everything you see today we'll get to you after the fact as well for this presentations and other information you may need. Thanks for the time today to talk a little bit about the Red Line operations. Just a background on kind of why I'm here, and my background in this is that I've served on the MBTA board for just, will be just under 10 years this year. And also the same time I've served in the Apple Valley City Council. So well connected to this. 4 of those years have been as chair in 2 different terms. So fairly well versed there. One of the pieces that I've seen great movement in those 10 years is our relationship with Met Council and our desire to bring them more into a better working relationship on both parts. And that includes moving some meeting schedules around. So we were able to make some time for them to be at our meetings and do those kind of things. We've established monthly meetings with some of our STA representatives, as well as Commissioner Barber and Commissioner Johnson on a monthly basis. So there's a chance outside of those meeting environments just for the 4 of us as policymakers to have discussions. So that's been a piece that has been high on my radar. It's not perfect by any means, but it is certainly better than where it was 10 years ago. And so part of the reason I think I am here today is to talk about kind of my surprise at the approach that was taken regarding the Red Line relationship and what we're talking about right now. So Luther, if you don't mind hitting that next slide, I think you've got the control there for me. September 4th, as many of you know, we received a 90-day termination notice from the Met Council regarding the Red Line operations. After that notice, in an attempt to have some further discussions, I also met with Chair Zelli and Commissioner Barber independently of that, and we had a discussion there. What resulted in that discussion was, and really the ask in that discussion, I should say, was to provide another 90 days to help us understand why the transition was occurring and to allow for a more timely transition of service, considering this is a rather large operation to move in a short period of time. That followed up with the end of the result of that call was a understanding of why we were concerned about the process, but not a willingness to ask staff to extend that decision any. Cities of Apple Valley and Egan sent similar requests and received a similar response. As chair, I really wanted to understand what was behind the decision. And so we asked for some additional information in there, was told it was largely a financial decision, or was completely a financial decision. My first ask for additional information on the financial decision resulted in 2 PowerPoint slides provided by Mr. Thompson. It took us until mid-October to get the rest of that detailed information behind what was in those slides, because some of those numbers just didn't make sense, and certainly without being able to dig into the numbers, it was very difficult to understand what was behind those financial slides. That's really where I'm going to pause and let Luther jump in here and just go into some of the details and the rest of the pieces behind it. So Luther, do you want to pick it up from here?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Clint. So
Mr. Winder.
How are you doing, Madam Chair? Committee, thank you for the opportunity to address just want to just give a little context, as everyone may not be familiar with what the Red Line is or where it operates, just from the very beginning. It's service that was originated in 2013. It's highway BRT. It was the first BRT in the region. It's not necessarily it's not classified as a BRT any longer, simply for the fact it doesn't operate of the frequency of a BRT service, and the stations are too far apart to be considered on BRT service. MVTA has operated that service since the beginning of 2013. We helped with the policies and standard operating procedures to develop, as well as station design at Apple Valley Transit. And those things were modified and used at other arterial BRTs across the region. So also understand that this BRT service is a little bit different than the arterial BRTs because they do different platform heights. So there is, from that standpoint, it's not just plug and play between the two. So as we talk about, we've always considered it local service, and we modified our local services to support this particular, because we operated it, and customers who would have received direct rides, we asked them to transfer it either at Apple Valley Transit Station or at Cedar Grove Transit Station, and to take the Red Line to the mall, as opposed to running some of our other services where we take customers directly to the mall. So we went from 1-seat ride to 2-seat ride for many of our customer service here to support this, because we maintain operation of it. So understanding, when we look back on the justification that was given for the 90-day termination, it came on September 4th. I just want to understand, and just to reiterate what the board chair Clinton said, as well as Apple Valley City Council, there was no communication at all with any of the elected officials inside the service area. And there really honestly were base level communications between MVTA staff and Met Council staff, but not to the understanding where we understood, or I understood, that this was something we were moving towards. This was a solely Met Council staff-driven decision, by my understanding, by Nick Thompson. It did not go before the Met Council Zone Transportation Committee. Again, there was no justification provided to any electeds prior to, but afterwards there were some, and we'll get into some of those things. We'll get into some of those justifications that have shifted over time based on requests. I do want to first thank you wholeheartedly from this committee for requesting some level of information, because that information that came over to Chair Mason as well as Vice Chair Pratt was additional information that we had not yet received or seen either, as we continue to go through this process to have this public vetting and understanding what the background and nature is of this particular decision, and hopefully get this delayed so we can continue to explore and look at what's best for the region, as well as the cities that are served by this particular service. But some of the justifications we're given was Metro Transit driver availability. Metro Transit drivers do an amazing job. They're amazing job, and they deserve recognition, as well as do our Smitty and Sons operators, who have been utilizing and serving and providing service on this route since 2013. But it's important to understand that pre-pandemic levels, as well as historically, we have not had driver shortages, nor have we had to cut routes. We have not missed one trip or cut one trip or redline any of our services since our iteration of this particular service. When it came to security alignment, with some information that also came back, it's important to understand, and I actually thought Wes did a really great job talking about security and how the integration between obviously suburban providers and Metro Transit operate. But it's important to also note that my communication doesn't happen with Mr. Korstrom. My communication happens with Nick Thompson. And one of the things that we came to understand about a year and a half ago was that the FTA, that Metro Transit that patrolled the Red Line, that was cut, or it may have been repurposed. I was told at the time it was cut. So during that particular time, we've seen an increase in some non-transit activity along the Red Line corridor. I have a picture that I'll show you as we go in the next slide. It's important to understand, as you look at this, that change providers doesn't better align security. It shuts out the local electeds of Apple and Egan on public safety at transit stations, while still placing the burden on local law enforcement, who respond primarily based on proximity. The whole purpose of this, and I'll iterate this and sew this back in as much as I possibly can. The Red Line operates from 3:45 in the morning till a little bit after midnight. our express services, so that operates before a lot of our express services, for a lot of our local services, and after a lot of our express service and local services. So when it comes to activity, stations being open, need to obviously accommodate, the bulk of these stations are our Apple Valley Transit Station, even though Red Line doesn't do the majority of the ridership there, the sheer number of hours and the individuals who utilize the service still need to use the amenities before and after our normal service begins and ends. That's where we've seen some challenges, especially during COVID time. But as we continue to push forward, when we talk about operational efficiencies, one of it was very interesting to me. They talked about argument for taking a Red Line when it came to delivering more efficient service more economically and efficiently. I want to make sure we all understand it, because there are certain things that I don't always, I don't ever want anyone, the basic principles on most things when in life with contracts is normally that you're able to look at your directly operating cost and then look at a contracting cost and then negotiate something that provides you some savings over your directly operating cost. That is the way it works in the world. This is no different here, and it would be no different if we entered into and had good faith contractual negotiations, and if the real data and information is provided, we move forward to understand what the true costs are. But we do look at some of the assumptions that are made, and I think I've seen that letter that went over to Vice Chair Pratt, as well as Chair Mason, concerning cost, and we'll dive down in this. But that does not take into account the current labor agreement. We don't know what that labor agreement is going to be when it comes to the final cost. The highest percentage of cost for any service is labor costs. And when we look at our labor costs composed to labor costs by the fine men and women of Metro Transit, based on the fine men and women of Smitty's and Sons that we contract with, is substantially lower. Also, too, the council continues to contribute this $500,000 for security costs in VTA. I just want to take and understand. I want everyone to kind of understand what came about. And I'll use this slide to show customer impact. So at this particular time, this was sleeping. I just have one where we had the microwave and the full setup at this particular time. But what we continue to see with the cut in FTE when it came to the patrols on the Red Line corridor, as well as some challenges we were seeing, especially with the advent of some more ridership, we continue to see the increase in non-transit activity at our stations, where they were having encampments. They were putting up, as you see, hammocks in this picture here. They had whole microwave setups. We had some vandalism. We were on pace to have that to double our incidents between 2019 and 2020 if something wasn't done. What we reached out to do was, we understood at the time that there were challenges in the Corps when related to security overall. We made the decision to look at to find out how much it would cost if we looked at private security to provide that, so the Metro Transit could continue to focus their security efforts toward the Corps where we believe they were most needed. We just did a quote. I got a quote. We put an RFP out. I sent it to Nick Thompson, said, this is the range, $30 to $55 an hour is what we've seen, as well as this is what we're experiencing. And this is a range that we're seeing. It came back on our on this request that we had based on our security needs. When everyone understand what that response was, and that was back in March, nothing. Never received a response. The only time I ever received the response is when now they use that in their actual rational reason, a reason for why it's such a higher cost for us to operate service. We had no contract negotiations. We never said it was an either or. We sent it as an informational thing, never received a word back directly from it, trying to do our due diligence. And I think that's what transit providers should do working with the MPO. We should find a problem and try to identify a solution, and then work together to see what the best solution is for the region or for that particular area. But that never happened there. But understanding that there definitely would continue to be severe customer impacts if we don't continue to look at this decision when it comes to overall MVTA service. We have a 95% customer satisfaction rating. That relates to our clean and efficient service, also related to service provider Red Line. It's also understand that the way we manage our stations is a little bit different in the in this pandemic pandemic environment than does obviously our counterparts in Metro Transit. One, because our service is a little bit different. As was alluded to, express service is down tremendously. That is, but our local MVTA's local service continues to be strong, and the Suburban Express is doing about 80% of its pre-pandemic levels, doing extremely well. But there's been less ridership on our stations. We started to see more transit activity. We received no response from Nick Thompson, the council, when I sent this back in March. And I had this at that particular time. Also, base was coming from health experts and the governor about limiting congregation. We closed our stations. We're going to open them back up December 5th because obviously weather. I'm moving for the weather. But this was done in order to honestly maintain customer safety, but as well as continue to address some of the security issues we were having on the particular core. Important to understand that without proper management of these stations, because of that sheer volume of transit, we can find ourselves in our local communities who want a stake in understanding and public safety and operating transit services will have to deal with those particular consequences if they don't obviously have some level of ownership stake as they do now with MVTA because they sit on our board. I want to also look at our customer impact. Employee impact with this. That Red Line provides a significant number of jobs in the South Metro. We're not looking to shift the pandemic burden from the council to the suburban providers. Unfortunately, we furloughed 110 operators during the pandemic. I now operate because I didn't receive enough of CARES funds as my counterparts did to take me through 2022. We barely had enough CARES funds to get us through this particular year. So we had to right size our service. The men and women like Willis, like Aubrey, like Brian, who continue to operate that service day in and day out, that red line would affect 25% of my workforce. Another 30 operators, mechanics, as well as operators will be affected by this, that we may have to furlough with this loss of service. We have made the tough decisions. We have cut our service. I cannot, in good conscience, look these men and women in the eye who have continued to work day in and day out and tell them we have to sacrifice even more. And it's driven by our MPO taking service that we've operated from day one, that we've done a good job and they've done a good job doing. It's not right, it's not fair. But also when we look at too, that this service continues to operate like local service, 6% of our weekday hours and 25% of our weekdays. This is significant service to our agency because we've always operated it. Just as we continue to get in these transition savings that are continuing to be floated about, I want to understand that Metro Transit talks of a 2.72 million is what they talked about for 2021 to operate our proposed budget for operations would probably be 2.2, but mind you, we have to base it on, we base on historicals because we never entered into any type of 2021 budget negotiation. So any number they give you where this 3.8 or what have you, like they said, is a draft budget, that's a draft budget they created. We didn't tell them that because we never provided it. We never had those discussions. But our current budget for operations for Red Line is $2 million. That's our current budget. So there's no way $2 million for operations, about $800,000 for facilities. That facilities cost will stay regardless because of the span of hours that happen. Someone has to still maintain the lights, the electricity, the maintenance, the snow plowing, all that still has to be done. But operations cost is still directly lower. So I just want to continue to talk about that number. That figure is inaccurate, but I think continued discussion as well as continued oversight will help us obviously get to a place where we all have some level of common understanding.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt. My understanding is that Zoom is going to cut us off at 2:15.
Okay.
So I'm thinking we're going to have to reschedule another meeting at this point. I apologize.
Oh yeah,
unless there's a way that we can do this in writing, but that would be my thought is we have about
5 minutes.
4 minutes left.
All right, let me just wrap this up then.
Okay, so if you would do that, then we should be in good shape. Thank you.
No problem.
Madam Chair, we should have time for Nick Thompson to respond.
My understanding is Met Council was not going, they had to leave at 2:00 and they were not planning and participating in the discussion.
Nick is still here.
Is it?
Everyone else has left.
Okay, I let Luther finish his comment, and then if we can go on, but just be aware that we might be cut off. Please proceed.
Last but not, just to focus on, there is obviously a Minnesota statute that talks about local services and giving the opt-out communities the ability to decide their transit. Apple Valley and Egan seek reconsideration of this decision. Just a cookie piggyback, we did have a discussion. I had a discussion with Nick Thompson this past Friday. One of the things we've been trying to do, we've been trying to be solution driven, but we've continued roadblocks, was allowing Metro Transit to operate the service. They did a driver pick just as we did until March 13th. They continued discussions. That was rejected, as well as MVTA since 2017, the ultimate budget saving that we talk about has offered to absorb Redline into our own operating budget. And we've been requesting to do this in our existing operating budget because we view it as local service. We've operated it and we want to continue to operate it. We just continue to commit to have good faith discussions, and we need obviously continued support and oversight. We believe from a legislative body to help us get to that point, because to date, the only information we've received has been when it's been requested from our legislative elected.
Thank you. Do you want to, is Mr. Thompson still available?
Madam Chair, I am. I know we just have a minute here. So I think we provided quite a bit of information to this committee in response to some of the information that Luther has stated. It's unfortunate that there's some clear misstatements in what was just presented to you. I'll just point out a couple of things in this last minute. Is one of the information we submitted was the agreement from 2010 that the MBTA board and Met Council reached, where they both agreed that it was the council's decision on who would operate the red line in the future years. And so looking back at that agreement, that gives us the ability to make the change that we had. The financial reasons, in the next biennium, as we presented early in the meeting, we're facing a significant financial issues in the next biennium, and the ability to save over $2 million and continue to operate a service that is the same as it is today for the customers is a very compelling case that we feel that we need to make as part of many things that we've been asked to find different ways to save money to make that budget gap that will be in front of the legislature next spring. Try to reduce the amount there. We're confident that on December 5th, when Metro Transit begins to operate this facility, customers will get great service. MBTA, who contracted it out to Schmidt & Sons, also provided good services, so we can continue to expect that. But we presented a multitude of reasons why this change made sense at this time, and financial was not the only one, but I'm sure it's of interest to this committee that we can continue to provide this service with over $2 million in biennium savings. And I see it's 2:15, so I'll pause there in case we're cut off.
Okay.
And we're open if you want to send another meeting, another link out if need be, too, another Zoom link.
Okay. It is my understanding that there's a difference in the figures that have been given by Met Council about the operation, and that needs to be clarified. I see that Representative Koznick has a question, so if you want to give a question, just knowing that you will probably be cut off by Zoom, feel free.
Yeah, I was just, to my understanding that there's an operating subsidy or operating loss. So that subsidy, is that paid by the Minnesota Valley, or is that paid by the Met Council?
Madam Chair,
Or do they both contribute?
Madam Chair, remember the red line is 100%.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, Madam Chair. The red line is 100% funded by the Met Council.
That's not true.
So that full subsidy is paid by the Met Councils in our budget.
That's not true. We enter into a contract.
Mr. Winder?
Yes, it's good, Madam Chair. We enter a contract with Met Council every year with a not to exceed amount. If it goes over that not to exceed amount, it comes out of MVTA's budget. Last year, MVT committed $200,000 of their own operating funds to operating the red line. So there are contractual mechanisms in place that would maintain any level of savings historically and move forward that the council continues to talk to. So understand this is not a financially driven decision because we didn't have contract negotiations to match whatever fantastical numbers that the council is now putting out today.
Okay. At this point, I'm going to call the meeting to an end so we don't get in the middle of somebody. This, to me, is an ongoing discussion that we need to have because it's unfortunate that we have this controversy to begin with. But for right now, I am going to call this commission meeting to an end, and we'll try to reschedule in the near future. Thank you, everyone.